Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Visual Talkcast. I am your host, producer Yannis Lobaina, and this episode of Visual Talk, as I say, is special. All my guests are very special guests, and today I'm so grateful to have Sheniz Janmohamed to close this season, the 2024 December. So it's like a very magical day today to record this episode with her. I am so grateful to have Sheniz. She's an amazing author, poet, artist, educator, and mentor. Welcome, Sheniz, and thank you so
Thank you.
much for being here.
Thank you for having me. Such a pleasure seeing you.
Yes, exactly. To connect finally. Beautiful. I want to start by sharing with you and with my audience a little short story about how I connect with you and how I met you in this platform. And it was a long time ago, 2018 maybe, I don't know. Thanks to a Google alert.
Oh, wow.
Yes, exactly. A Google alert about nature art and mandala art. And it was your name there. And I was like, wow, I love this person. And he's a poet. And I went to your social media and I love all your stuff that you share there. So I started to follow you. And then I started to participate in your signature workshop, Chai and Write. And that's how I met. And now we are here. It's a whole.
I love that. I was actually trying to remember how we connected. And I think it was just that, sometimes social media is not the best for a lot of reasons, but in other ways, you connect with people organically, or maybe through the algorithm, they, recommend people to you. And so I thought maybe that's why. And I was like, how come I haven't met her before? Because the work that you do is so inspiring. And I appreciate the work that you do in community. So we were meant to connect in some way. Yeah.
Exactly. That's exactly what I want to share these short little things, but it's special for me because I say, yes, how we can never cross path, but we cross online because life now is kind of more virtual, unfortunately. But yes, that's it. So, welcome, Sheniz, to a Visual Talk podcast. And I would like to start with a first question, some remind for myself. In your beautiful book, Reminders of the Path, you wrote a heartfelt author note. I love it, reflecting on your experience growing up in a small town outside of Toronto. And you mentioned a feeling of sense of no belonging until you visit your grandmother in Kenya. That changed everything for you. I would like if you can share with us, if you feel comfortable, of course. Could you tell us what the name of the town and how you were during that transformative visit? Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah. So I grew up in Scarborough. The first few years of my life were in Scarborough, and then we moved to Markham. And when I was growing up in Markham, in the school that I went to, I was one of a handful of brown kids. I think there were maybe two or three of us in the entire school. And my experience was, I think sometimes, there's a convenience in just saying I didn't fit in, but I didn't fit in and I also fit in, right? There were elements of my childhood that I did feel very connected to. And there were other times where I felt, no, I didn't belong. And it was often just through these reminders of events that happened in school where, I remember one time I had asked a fellow student to borrow an eraser, and he said, no, you're brown. And I was like, and I just remember thinking, that doesn't make sense. Like, what does that have to do with an eraser? Like, I didn't register it as racism. I just was logically trying to understand, well, how does that have any impact on whether I need an eraser or not, right? And he was actually more tanned than I was. And so I said to him, I said, well, you're darker than me. And he was a white kid, but he just had like a tan. And I remember him just like being very confused by my response. So yeah, just these little experiences like that where I think you know, as a child, you're not always registering what the discrimination is. You're just feeling it in your body. And then later on, when you have the words, you realize that, oh, that was actually racism or discrimination. So that was part of my experience. And just also just being, the kid, even in high school, like the kid that would be at the library, writing poems, or during my lunch hour, I was, in the library writing poems and listening to lyrics and trying to figure out the lyrics, because as some of you may know, we didn't have, I'm not going to say like the big streaming service names, but we didn't have those streaming services. So if you wanted to listen to a song, you'd record it with a tape recorder. Yeah. And so I would just record these songs that I liked and then keep replaying them over and over again to get the lyrics down. And so that was kind of my youth, was doing a lot of solitary activities and just not feeling like I fit in on that level either. And so being in Kenya, the first time I went to Kenya was actually when I was 3. And so, yeah, and so I don't remember specific events, but I just remember feeling at home. And so I think that was the experience that kind of dotted my childhood, as we would go back in the summers to Kenya, to a small town where my grandmother lived, which is called Eldoret, and it's in the highlands of Kenya. It's actually very close to where a lot of the marathon runners train. So just that experience of having a place where I could just be myself, where I wasn't being watched, right, for what I was doing or not doing. I could just be at home, and at home with family, and just being in your grandmother's house. There's a different sense of home and belonging. And so those were the two kind of, I wouldn't say they weren't oppositional experiences, but they were just complementary experiences of my childhood. And that's what made me who I am in many ways.
No, actually, no. I always like to start, mostly always, to ask about the childhood, because I believe that is our foundation for many stuff happen after. No, for many stuff we have to dig in our childhood. And it's interesting for me as an immigrant. I come from Cuba, and I am new in Canada, almost 10 years. But I feel like Canada, many Canadians have been even Canadian mixed race, or Canadian with other generation, the family, immigrants family, all have the same feeling, the experiment, like being isolated or being, I don't know, it's like it's a lot of data about that. And I feel like we have to talk more about that, how that habit has to change in some point. No, I wonder about my daughter who is mixed as well. She's in school age, and all that affect very deep our connection with this land, as well. Well, thank you so much for sharing that with us.
Yeah, a lot of considerations. And it's interesting. I was talking to someone else recently about, the immigrant experience. Like for me, was through my parents, right? So I was born here, but I heard the stories of immigration from my parents. And now we have second generation, third generation. And their experiences are very different because they didn't have that journey from one place to the other. So there's almost I wouldn't say like maybe a double exile, right? Because the homeland where their parents or grandparents are from is not necessarily a place where they may feel fully at home, because even for me, I don't speak the language fluently, so that in itself is a barrier, right? So there's some things about us that are very Canadian, whatever Canadian is in the context of being a settler, right? But there are these things that mark us as not belonging to the place of our ancestors. And then being here, I just did a workshop last week with grade 8 students, and I asked them, have you been asked the question, where are you from? And they all raised their hands. And then, the second question was, have you been asked, but where are your parents from, when you answer, Toronto or whatever? And they kept their hands up, or a lot of them kept their hands up. And so there's still this feeling, especially for those of us who are, people of color, that, well, no, like, where are you really from? Right? Even if you were born in Toronto or in Canada, what does it actually mean to belong? And so there's this double exile. And I think when I was a kid, I really wanted to belong to one of those places fully. And as I got older, I was like, no, I think home is somewhere in the middle. You know, it's not having to make that choice. And so, and that's confusing because people want to be able to label you and put you in one category. So being in that in-between space is challenging not only for us but also for people who are trying to categorize us, but too bad for them.
Oh, that's a hard work for me. I always ask about immigration because I grew up in Cuba, but with a mixed family with Chinese, Lebanese, and Spaniard. So I had all that melange. For me, it was like, and my daughter now is with my husband mix as well, Filipino, Canadian, Irish, and whatever. It's
Wow.
like, oh my God, all the continents in one person. Yes, that's very interesting. And also, I love what you say, and beautiful you say that. And I recommend the audience that we should talk today to find your books, Reminders on the Path. And you have a beautiful poem called Ancestors, and all about this feeling, how with how you honor your ancestor, but what is the ancestor from here, from Canada, from there, Kenya, or back home. And yes, it's a beautiful. Thank you so much, Sheniz.
Thank you.
No, my second question, talking about the your books, Reminders on the Path. I love how it's divided in sections. I love all every section is like a poem. I love all the titles you put it there, inherence, and all the points there, and also embark, return. You play with the words re and turn, and also home, of course. And I love how you play with memories, language, seasons. Very important how you, almost in all your books that I read yet, season is very important for you and your poetry. And how was the process of writing this collection, which is beautiful?
Thank you so much. You're so kind. Yeah, the process. Well, it's interesting because you when you start out writing a book, you have a very specific idea. And I realized as I was continuing to write it that I had to give up some of that rigidity of what I thought it would look like because experiences can determine what you write. And so the question for me was, well, do I respond to the experiences or do I, stay on this path of writing the book that I had envisioned? And so I did listen to those experiences. I did allow them to influence the book. So initially, the idea for the book was very different. It was meant to be a garden. And so each section was going to be a different element of the garden. And then as I was writing it, it just kept wanting to be in a different form.
Wow.
Like it was just not working. All me trying, it was like I was trying to fit, into this form that wasn't working. And so I had to really sit with myself and say, okay, let go. Just let go of what you're trying to make it and let it be what it wants to be. And so what ended up coming to me was a path. And the path is a path through time. Right. So it's a path from from ancestral time to the present, to the past, to the future. Like there's no linear journey. It's really cyclical and it can keep coming back around. And I think that's how, not to speak for everyone, but I think that's how many of us experience life. We're in the present, but what's happened in the past can influence how we respond to the present. Sometimes the way that we interact with the world is based on, ancestral trauma. Right. And so it's like, how do we work through that with an awareness that that's what's happening? So the form really spoke to where I was in my own process. And then I went to Kenya with the intention of interviewing my grandmother, my maternal grandmother. And so I came armed with all these questions. And I was like, the first thing I said to my grandmother was like, tell me your story. I want to know. And she's like, I don't have a story. And I said, of course you have a story. And she said, I have nothing to tell. And so suddenly I was faced with this resistance, and I had to work through that with her. And eventually she did tell me. She always tells stories, right? Like I think, grandparents have a tendency to tell stories when they're doing other things like cooking or, organizing their closets, and you're sitting with them or watching them as they're doing this, and the stories just come out. So, but to be sitting and asked, it's a very different approach than what they might be used to. And so slowly the stories did come out. And then it was a question of me asking myself, when have I told myself I don't have a story or my story's not important, right? Because that was something that was also unintentionally, obviously, inherited, right? This idea that, oh, well, no one's going to want to read this, or I have nothing to tell, right? And that wasn't coming from me. It was coming from my ancestors, but they obviously got it from their ancestors, or the way that the world was at the time that determined that nobody actually wanted to hear those stories. And so that was part of the exploration as well, is like, what does it mean to reclaim one's voice, one's journey, and not as something that needs to be negated, right? But to be embraced. And so that's really what it was. There's sections where it's more of a dialogue with my ancestors. And then there's a section where, sections where it's a dialogue with myself and with nature too.
Yes, of course. Yeah, that's one element in your poetry, and I really highlight that in other questions as well. Talk about nature. I just realized yesterday your second book, you say Fire Smoke, is this year mark 10 years. I didn't know that when I was preparing for my interview with you.
I even forgot, so it's fine. I was like, has it been 10 years?
That's nice. The question there. So I would like you talk back again. I just realized your second book, beautiful book, Fire Smoke, I read as well from the library. This year mark 10 years. So do you have a favorite poem on this book that you want to read, you want to share with us or talk about? Because that book is so beautiful, and also it's very tuned with this month of December, which we will release the podcast. I guess it's like the fire smoke we need for this month.
Oh yeah, we need some fire. Yeah, that's a good question. Do I have a favorite? I have a couple of favorite poems from the collection that I do return to, but I think
the one that you feel now today, why we are talking, you're feeling resonate with you, and if you feel like you want to share, of course, that's no pressure.
I think, this one I'm thinking about, we're anticipating snow very shortly. I mean, they keep saying it's going to snow. It hasn't yet, but it's coming.
I'm so happy, don't worry.
Yeah, I have two. Maybe there's a little short one that's called, very appropriately titled, Winter Approaches. So I'll just read it. Winter approaches. A sumac bends over a frozen stream, petrified by its own reflection. The bough is sheathed in ice and a fine dust of snow. Each branch needles the overcast sky, stunned into silence. When the last leaf falls, what will die within us?
Wow.
Yeah, that last line. I asked that question myself, when the last leaf, because there's still leaves on the trees at the moment, but when that last leaf falls, what dies within us? And it doesn't have to be again, like, everything's open into interpretation. It doesn't have to be a negative thing. It can be, well, what are we ready to let go of?
Yes. In your workshop, as I mentioned before, in Child Right, I love how you introduce us to settling down this beautiful season. I have a very hard time to accept winter, but now I kind of more ready because I have been read, and I feel like, yes, it's another season I have to accept and enjoy as well, and find some joy stuff to do.
It's hard. Yeah, I find this season very, I find the darkness hard. I think the cold, if it's sunny, there's something about it being tolerable. But if it's dark, yeah, and then it's just a question of like, how do we embrace that darkness, right? But just the earlier hours of darkness, you just want to crawl into your space and not do anything. And yet the world is like, go, go, go. It's a
Yeah.
busy time, do things. So I think that's also why it's difficult for a lot of people. It's that there's this internal world wants to kind of slow down and nature slowing down. And yet we're being forced to be out and about and doing things and, still matching that level of productivity as you might have in other seasons.
That's absolutely true. Yes, I try to be more conscious about that and eliminate my very busy calendar in December to enjoy it.
Mm.
I read in your website in 2022, you serve as a writer residency at the University of Toronto, Scarborough campus.
Mm-hmm.
So there you were the first writer of South Asian descendant to serve in this position, and I am so proud of that. Can you share with us what has been the impact that this writer residency and become a mentor during that time, and how was that experience for you? If you can share a little bit with us, please. Thank you.
I think it was a bit challenging because it was still around the time of COVID. I mean, I know it was 2 years after, but it was a winter season, so things were a little bit dicey in terms of in person. So we ended up doing most of the residency online, whereas it would have been in person otherwise. So I think something was lost in that because there was something about seeing people in the same space over a period of weeks and months and just having that connection with them. And so that was challenging. But what I did do, part of my responsibility as a writer in residence was to have sessions with students, creative writing sessions. So I would lead those sessions, and they were English students, creative writing students. And it was kind of like a drop in the lunch hour if they wanted to come in. And that was like an online session. But there were a couple of students who really took to the prompts and took advantage of the office hours. So that was another element of what I did, where I held office hours where they could come and ask any questions about the writing life, the writing process, but also if they wanted specific feedback on work that they were writing. And a couple of those students, I'm still not as in touch as I would like to be, but I'm still connected to them and have written reference letters for them for their creative writing programs or master's programs. And so that was really the joy of the program, was just being able to support students and young writers, because that's how I got to be a writer myself, was through the mentorship and support of other writers who took me on. So yeah, it felt like a full circle moment. And the fact that it was in Scarborough, coming back to the place where I grew up, but also I graduated from the University of Toronto St. George campus, but it was still my alma mater, really. So yeah, it did feel like a full circle moment for me. Absolutely.
That's wonderful. Yes, I asked that question because I know you do mentorship as well. And I always ask when I find the writers, their mentor as well. That's a very important thing for me and for, I think the audience will appreciate how it's impact not only the life, the mentor as well, the mentee life as well is a very, the mentor about how important is being a writer mentor.
Yeah, I think it's also, we always think about, oh, we're serving the mentee, but I think it's not that simple, because when I work with younger writers or younger artists, and they don't necessarily have to be younger, but maybe newer, right? Because you can be a mentee and be older and you're starting in a new field. So I think that's really important, because there's this kind of ingrained ageism that, oh, if you're a mentee, you must be young. But some of the people that I've worked with are older, and sometimes older than me, or around my age, but they're starting out in this new field. And so because of that, they're bringing a wealth of experience. They're bringing their own perspectives. They're bringing their own voice. And that's really important to honor. And sometimes I think we have to be very careful of not trying to make a writer like us, right? And you see this with some writers where you can tell that they're writing in the same vein or the same style as their mentor. And so for me, it's not about that. It's about, what is your voice? How can I actually support you in finding your voice and your style and giving you that support, whether it's me mentoring you or me saying to you, know what, I'm not the right mentor for you because I think the genre you're working in or the style you're working in would be better suited to this author or to this writer who I will connect you with. Right. So I don't take on mentees simply to kind of accumulate these mentee mentor relationships, but more because I can actually serve them and support them, but also they serve and support me in many ways, right? I have a young mentee in arts education who I'm working with, and she works in sustainable arts practices. And so I'm supporting her through her arts education practice, but she's very accomplished in her own arts practice and in knowing about sustainable materials, how to work with them. And there are things that I don't know. And so I learned through her as well. So it has to be this reciprocal relationship, but without expecting, right? Like without expecting that your mentee has to give you something. You can't expect that. But by default of just being in relationship, that will happen, whether it's just through their example or learning from them. Yeah.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much for remarking that, because that's very important. And I agree with you, absolutely. And I have been in both sides, even with my age. And yes, absolutely agree. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
Approach. That's beautiful. I would like to keep talking about your beautiful poetry books, and I read your currently work in another collection of essays about your grandmother garden in the highland of Kenya. I would like to go there. Can you talk about, if you can share, of course, a little bit how this special collection do you envision it, and what we will find there, if you can share?
Yeah, so I think I'm going to keep it a little bit under wraps for now because I'm still working out the details, but this is going to be a creative nonfiction book. So it won't be poetry. It will be, I think, poetry seeps into everything we do. If you're a poet, even if you're writing in a different genre, you're still bringing that poetic sensibility. So they are more reflections, short and long. So some are more in essay format, some are a little bit more reflective and shorter meditations on place. And so just how we were talking about childhood and those seminal experiences in our childhood, this really speaks to that. So this book is about what it means to be of two places, right? To have ancestry in Kenya and be connected to plants and trees, but also family, ancestry, and what that means for me as I navigate the world on Turtle Island, right? Like being in relationship with place here and those seminal childhood experiences I had here, but through the lens of grief, and grief can be layered. So not just personal grief. I did lose my grandmother in 2022. And so, contemplating what it means to lose your last grandparent is part of this book, but also the grief of change, right? Things changing at a rapid pace, whether it's through urbanization or the encroachment of industry on a city or on a town, or in nature. And what does that mean for us as stewards of the environment, or people who are trying to be stewards of the environment? And with that comes the responsibility of, again, I guess the word today is relationship, being in relationship with place. So that's really what the book is about. It's about the personal reflections of grief, but then how they're grief and joy, not just grief, but grief and joy, and change, and sitting with this change and working with this change, but also what is our responsibility now as future ancestors, witnessing all these changes in our environment, but also in our internal worlds. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And that's so beautiful. I am so looking forward for that
Thank you.
collection, of course.
Knock on wood, let's see what happens.
Yeah, good. Thank you, but we do it good. Yes, I agree with you. We have to feeling the grief and talk about that and write about that. That's very important to heal, maybe, and help others as well too. That's so beautiful.
Yeah, there's a beautiful book called The Smell of Dust on, no, The Smell of Rain on Dust. And the subtitle is Grief and Praise, and it's by Martin Prejtel. And that book, I read that book when I was in Kenya a couple of years ago. And it's all about honoring grief, and not just personal grief, but collective grief, but also what happens when we don't confront that grief in ourselves in an embodied way. And it's so fascinating to see, right? Just as a culture, how we don't really talk about that grief and walking around with that grief. It's very personal, but there's collective grief that sometimes hasn't been processed, and then we see it enacted upon like the earth, upon each other, right? And so I found that book to be really grounding, and I recommend it to anybody who is navigating those questions.
Yes, thank you so much. I already mark, and I will check it out. Honor and through the poetry as well. I know you love to do a sensory poetry walk. We love to enjoy it one day in person, and also because you are a nature lover like me and protect as well. And how, for you, what have been the most valuable thing of doing this as a community project? What do you, because we do that for ourselves, usually you open that door for community. I know myself is something different. What I mean for you, if you can.
Yeah, I think, when I go for walks on my own, I have a trail. I'm lucky enough to have a trail near my home. And so I try to go, if not daily, a couple of times a week, I'll go for a walk and just really pay attention to the environment. What's changed? If I haven't gone for a walk in a few days and then I go, I notice changes already, right? What's transformed. And also just doing these practices for myself of observation, of being in the present moment with the environment that I'm in. And then for me, it's the work is not complete unless I can share it, right? And so if I'm able to do that and see the benefit of doing that for myself, then as someone who works in community as an arts educator, I want to bring that to others. And one of the most important things I think that I've seen in doing this work with community and being outside is it really breaks down these institutional barriers, right? Like when you do workshops in buildings, in spaces that maybe people might not necessarily feel as comfortable in, like museums or, art galleries, there's a certain idea about idea of like the cultural elite, right? And like being in those spaces, sometimes people may not consciously feel it, but there's this underlying feeling of like, if I'm going to share, I have to share something really profound, right? Or I have to know what I'm saying because I'm in a museum or I'm in a gallery. And so for me, being able to first, we start in the gallery, or we start in, I've actually done most of these with art galleries. And so we start in the gallery and we do the same process of observation, of then choosing a piece or something that really speaks to us from the work. And then how do we embody that in our own practice, right? So sometimes we'll see a piece of art and it'll speak to us in some way and we don't have the words necessarily. But if we walk around with it, it's doing the work on us, right? And so being able to do that, take that kind of initial inspiration and connection, and then going out into nature and seeing how it's reflected in the environment around us. That's been really powerful to observe for me just as a facilitator. And then also just seeing how it really unlocks, for some people, it really unlocks these deep-seated feelings that they may not have processed, but they have permission or they have safety because in the environment of just being around trees, being in nature allows you to just, you know, and also the fact that, for example, I did a workshop or a nature walk in the autumn, and we were talking about imperfect leaves, right? That in our society, we're always looking for the most perfect things. The leaf, and we kind of extend that to nature, like, oh, I have to find a leaf that has no blemishes, that doesn't have any holes in it, that's perfect and complete, and then I can pick it up and use it. But I had done this exercise where I asked, and of course listeners can do this as well, where I asked people to intentionally choose imperfect leaves and then reflect on how that speaks to us and the imperfections within us, not as something to shun, but something to embrace again. And so nature has that ability. We can talk about that. We can talk about it in a room, but unless you're out in the world of nature and seeing it reflected back to you, that's where the teaching is. So I think of nature as my collaborator, and I'm just listening. I'm just listening for what I need to do to either step in the way or step out of the way. Right? Yeah.
That's beautiful. Now we can do a whole episode talking about that, and I know you're so passionate about that, like me. And I agree with you. Absolutely, life is imperfect, and we have to remind all the time because we live with so many patterns and capitalism stuff. We feel like yes, nothing is. We are not perfect, and we are humans. And yes, I always remind. I have a small, very twisted bamboo, and I always think I have to be like this bamboo. It's twist, it's very kind of imperfect everywhere, but still shine and keep growing, and it's beautiful.
I love that. Yeah. Be like the bamboo. Yeah. And like the bamboo doesn't want to be anything else. The bamboo's just the bamboo, right? Like it's not trying to be, a cherry blossom tree.
Thank you so much, Sheniz, for all these beautiful thoughts that you have shared with us in this episode. I would like to keep asking a little bit more about how your dreams translate into action. How
Wow.
That's a big question, I know. But step, if you had to maybe advise or give it to the audience or the people who will listen to us today, how are the very important steps as a creator, in this case, artist and writer, what steps do we have to take to make our dreams a little bit out in the life?
How to make dreams reality or take action towards dreams. Yeah, I mean, I think the dreaming is the most important. It's the anchor, right? I think sometimes when we get mired down from all the things we need to do around the dream, it can become very difficult to sustain it. But if I find that if I just keep coming back to the why am I doing this? Who is this for? Even with the book that I'm writing, there were periods of time where I was really frustrated by the industry around it, right? Like not necessarily what I was writing, but just having to navigate the industry. And so I have to keep returning to, well, who am I doing this for? Why am I doing this? And then that became the anchor. So having the purpose, the intention of the dream as an anchor, as a rootedness is very important. And then I would say, ask for help. Right. So I think sometimes we think, especially in this world where, the narrative is like, oh, I did it myself. Right? Like I'm a self-made whatever. And it's like, we know that that's not true, right? We are who we are because of community, because of family, because of friends, because of support. And so lean into that. If you don't know something, become a student again, right? So there might be elements of the practicality of making this dream a reality that you don't have the answers to. So for me, for example, I wanted to go back to Kenya, but I was trying to apply for a grant. And so in order to do this firsthand research, I needed the grant to do it. And I asked, again, like I asked one of my mentees who got the grant to support me. And so it's also humbling yourself that I don't know everything, and to seek out the people who do have the answers and who are willing to support you. And so through that, I was able to refine the grant, and I did get the grant. So I was able to travel to Kenya and do the research for my book, but even asking for mentorship. So I have an editor who's mentoring me, because this form of writing, I'm a poet. I do have some experience writing creative nonfiction, but there's some elements that I don't understand or know. And so it's again asking for support and asking for help. And the worst somebody could say is no, right? And then you find someone else, right? You might be aligned with someone better, or better suited for you, rather. So I think that's really important, to make your dreams actionable, keep the purpose and the intention clear, whether it's like something you need to write down and see at your desk, right? Or on the wall as a reminder, as an anchor. That's important. The second thing is making sure you ask for support, ask for mentorship, become curious about what you don't know, as opposed to kind of seeing that as a barrier or something you're just going to ignore, right? Because I think sometimes we're like, oh, well, I have this talent, so I don't need to know about this other stuff. I've got this. And it's like, but do you really? Right? So kind of humbling yourself to learn what you may not know and seek the support you need. And also just one step at a time. One step at a time. You don't need to have the entire thing figured out right away. Just like the book, right? Like I had this idea of the book in my head. I had created this plan, and then I allowed life to tell me what needs to happen next, right? So it's like I still have that structure, but I'm flexible within it. And so it's really important to just take one step at a time, not think you have to have the entire product figured out. And yeah, I think, again, that's the way the narrative of society has dictated how we should be creating, that we only see the final product. But it's called a first draft for a reason, right? It's the first draft.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, Sheniz. I agree with you. And yes, it's true. We have to sometimes not all the time, ask for help and be humble with that as well, and acknowledge. Yes. What makes Sheniz laugh?
What makes Sheniz laugh?
Yes, I love laughing.
Lots of things. I'm silly. I think people think, that sometimes they have an idea of me where I'm like very serious, but I'm very silly. So I love that question. I've never been asked that question. It's always been serious things. Yeah. I mean, memes make me laugh. Sometimes there's like hilarious videos on Instagram that make me laugh. I like satire. I find, like that intelligent, but also not taking yourself too seriously approach to comedy. I think that's really funny. So that makes me laugh. Kids make me laugh. Animals doing silly things makes me laugh. I make myself laugh. There are times where I just catch myself and I'm like, you're silly, like, so I can make myself laugh. I'm just taking myself too seriously. Yeah, I don't know if there's any specific
No, it's fine.
people, but yeah.
I agree with you. And yes, I love laughing. I don't know, it's something inside of myself. I am silly as well. I would like we almost arrived to the last section. We love to keep talking with you, but we have a lot of things to share. But I would like to ask you, what are the 3 things the world needs, in your opinion, of course, need right now? What do you think the world?
3 things the world needs right now? Wow. I don't know about 3 things, but one thing that I can think of right now is discernment. I think that we've gotten to a place where, and this includes me, where we sometimes lack discernment because we're getting so much information coming at us. And a lot of that information is designed to reaffirm our beliefs and ideas about ourselves, about each other, about the world. And so discernment is not something that's taught, but I think it should be, because especially because we're just getting so much coming at us without context, right? There's no context, and we have to create that context. And either we don't have the time or the skills, or because it's a convenient narrative, we won't, right? We won't find the context of something. So I think discernment. The other thing that comes to mind is balance. And I think that's tied to discernment, because you can get really off center when you are entrenched in one way of seeing the world. And if we're one side is like this and the other side is like this, like, where are we going to find the balance? And so balance is connected to discernment, I feel.
Yeah.
And the third thing, so the reason it's taking me a while is because these words are so overused. But what I'm thinking of is self-compassion and love, but again, like in action, right? So if we don't have, and again, love is not something that you arrive at. I think it's a process. And so it's not to say, oh, you need to love yourself and then everything will be great. No, it's a process and a practice to continuously bring ourselves back to that compassion, and not, oh, I love myself, I love everything, that's ego. But it's more like, oh, I didn't realize that I was experiencing this like deep pain about this thing. And then it's like that self-soothing, that self-compassion, because that in itself, when you're able to recognize that in yourself, you're able to see it in the world, right? You're able to see, like, this is why this person is suffering. I can see the causes and conditions that have led them to this place. And so you can have the love and compassion, but that doesn't necessarily mean you excuse the behavior, right? So that's where discernment comes in, right? But it allows us to kind of like open up from that tightness that we may have around things. And so, yeah, I would say that very grounded, actionable love, starting with being able to recognize that in oneself. And then because of that, you're able to see what the lack of love for oneself can do in the world. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Yes, no, I absolutely agree. And yes, it's a big question, and I need like a more time and to process,
Yeah.
because it's not simple things. And as you explained, beautiful. I agree with your three. Thank you so much for sharing. I would like to close to ask you something beautiful, because we need beauty and love and peace, as you say as well. And if you can share with us what something beautiful you have read, watched, or listened lately, if you can share with us. You share the books that you something that you wanna the audience that we should talk today know a little bit and have that pleasure.
Yeah. So the thing that's coming to mind right now is there's a beautiful YouTube channel that I come back to quite often, and it's a young man based he lives in the Black Sea region in Turkey, and he lives off the land in a small, I don't know if it's a shack, but like a small chalet, you could say. And he's a tea farmer. That's what he does for his living. But he makes these beautiful videos of how he reuses materials, things that maybe we would have thrown away or seen as just, garbage, but he utilizes them and makes something new out of them. And he's always learning new skills and working with and in the land. And I just find it so deeply inspiring and grounding, and a reminder that, we can use what we have, that we don't have to find the perfect thing. But it could just be what we have, available to us that can create beauty. And so one of the things he does is I remember one video where he made, for his grandmother, he made a rosary out of berries. So it's a particular kind of berry that you get in this region. And he hardened, I guess they harden, the seeds harden, and then he wove them into a rosary, which he then gifted his grandmother. And I just thought it was such a beautiful idea. So I did some experiments on my own. I went to the trail and we have some rose hips along the trail. And then also I have holly, a holly bush. And so I made my own rosaries out of holly berries and rose hips. And yeah, so it's just taking that inspiration from the very simple beauty of nature and creating from it. And his channel is called The Man Who Feels, which I love, you know.
So beautiful. And I would like to close Sheniz by say thank you to you for this time, for your mindful connection with me today and with our audience. And please, if you have something to comment, any events or projects, share with us or want to say something. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, well, thank you so much, Yannis. Such a pleasure as always being in your presence. I know we haven't seen each other as often as I'm sure we'd like, but just your presence in the world, in community, the work that you do is so important for many of us. So thank you for what you do. And I look forward to more conversations with you. But in terms of events, I do have a chai and write workshop coming up. I was like, when is it? It's December 19th. Yes, and it's to honor the winter solstice. And so it'll be an evening of gentle prompts and reflections as we move into a new year, but without the pressure of setting goals. It's really about, you know, planting seeds for the spring, which is a more natural cycle than, you know, planting seeds in January. So yeah, everyone who's listening, you're most welcome to join. It's online. It's a sliding scale, and I'm sure Yannis will include the details somewhere in the description. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Sheniz. It was a pleasure and honor to have you today. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Be well.